Hello, I am David Hackhoff. I'm the Executive Director of NewFest, New York's leading LGBTQ plus film and media organization. And I am so excited to welcome you to this very special conversation with filmmakers Lukas Dhont and Laura Poitras. Both are nominated for Academy Awards this year for their feature films. Laura is nominated for Best Documentary Film for her film All the Beauty and the Bloodshed, and Lukas is nominated for his film Close for Best International Feature Film. These are incredibly special films, and NewFest was very fortunate to have both of them at the 34th Annual New York LGBTQ Plus Film Festival this past October. We had the New York City premiere of Close, and All the Beauty and the Bloodshed was our closing night film. So we are so excited to bring these NewFest alums back together. Laura is actually a multi-NewFest alum. Her debut film was at the 2003 New York LGBTQ plus Film Festival, and we know that these two artists are big fans of each other and each other's films, and really excited to dig in to what they have to say and ask each other. Before we get started, I just wanted to read brief bios of both of these filmmakers. Lukas was born in Ghent, Belgium, and graduated from the Cass School of Arts in Ghent. Throughout his studies, he focused on fiction, but also explored the possibilities of documentary. In 2016, Lukas participated in the Cannes Cine Foundation residency with a script for his first feature film, Girl, which was presented at the Cannes Film Festival in the official selection, and won, among other awards, the Camera d'Or for Best First Movie. His second feature film, Close, was selected as part of the official competition of the 75th edition of the Cannes Film Festival and won the Grand Prix. Close screened at NewFest in October, as I said, this past October, and is now nominated for Best International Film at the upcoming Academy Awards. And Laura Poitras received an Academy Award for her film Citizen4, and her reporting on the NSA global mass surveillance received the Pulitzer Prize. Her first solo museum exhibition, Astro Noise, was presented at the Whitney Museum in 2016. Her 2021 film, Terror Contagion, was part of the anthology Year of the Everlasting Storm, executive produced by Jafar Panahi. Laura has been targeted by the US government for her work documenting post-9/11 America. In 2006, she was placed on a secret terrorist watch list and detained dozens of times at the US border. All the Beauty and the Bloodshed was the closing night film at NewFest 34 and is now nominated for Best Documentary Feature at the upcoming Academy Awards. So I am pleased now to welcome Laura Poitras and Lukas Dhont.
Hi.
Hey.
It's great to see you both. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much, David, and just a big hello to all the members and fans of NewFest. I'm a New Yorker, so this festival means a lot to me.
Yeah, same for me. Incredibly excited to be here. I'm not a New Yorker. I'm from Belgium, but I'm really looking forward to this conversation with Laura because I'm an incredible admirer of her work.
And you may not be a New Yorker permanently, Lukas, but you are in New York as this conversation is taking place. So we will grant you honorary New Yorker status, at least for the duration of this conversation. So I'm going to leave you to it. Thanks so much for joining us, and have a great conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, David. Yeah, this is really a treat. And yeah, I wish we were together, having a coffee or maybe a beer. I wanted to say, we've met each other sort of in this sort of world of the festivals, and we haven't really had enough time to really go into each other's works in terms of craft. So I'm really excited about asking you some questions. But I want to share with you first how I responded to your film. So I had been reading about it and wanting to see it. And then after seeing it, it had such the emotional resonance of your film is so extraordinary and so rare. It's the thing that I'm always looking for in a film, that one where you feel like you need to be sort of alone and walking the streets for hours to sort of process the emotional resonance of it. And then it also is one that stays with you. Like I felt like it has stayed with me. Like I can still conjure the kind of the emotional experience of the film. And it's just a really rare experience. You know, sometimes you see something and it will trigger your intellect, and then you leave it, and then it kind of, you know, it doesn't stay with you in the same kind of way. But one of the first thing I did after seeing it is I said, who is the cinematographer? Because it had this feeling, I mean, it does have almost a documentary sense. And like, I thought also of the Dardenne brothers. So I was curious if you're also influenced by their work, because it has a sort of palpable life to it. And so I thought maybe we could start with maybe not the usual question, but talk to me about your collaboration with your cinematographer and how some of these shots were done. Like, and I'd love to hear like the details of it. What, you know, what kind of a camera? Was he at a big crew? Was it, you know, how the motion and all that? So
that's such a great way to start. Also because it leads me to say immediately that I went to a film school that combined documentary and fiction. And so there was this moment where I didn't really know what direction I was going to take. Also because when I was making short documentaries, I felt so nourished and inspired, and it made me feel so alive. I mean, I decided to go in the fiction route. But I think when I work with our cinematographer, there's often this inspiration from documentary that comes back, especially when working with a young cast and in approaching a sort of sense or a sort of looking for authenticity with them. There's, of course, these moments that are incredibly choreographed, where the mise en scène is very defined, like running through a flower field, for example. That is, of course, the technique of that is incredibly present. But then there's also these moments where the energy of the actors, the rhythm and the melody of the actors, it is the most important part of the set, of the moment. And Frank, I consider to be a dancer who follows the actors rather than vice versa. And so when you look at the work of the brothers Dardenne, of course, it is incredibly choreographed. We dance together with these characters as we go through the world with them. And we're at eye level with them, which is something that I have always found incredibly important. When I work with these young people, I really try to be both on screen and off screen, really at eye level with them. And this is what I admire most about Frank, is he doesn't really have an ego. I mean that in a really good way. He will always prioritize for me the right things. When he doesn't believe a performance, he will come whisper in my ear, like, I don't believe the actors right now. Yeah. And I find that such a gift that your collaborators tell you those things, because it's somehow so easy not to.
Right.
And it just makes me feel like he is someone who has this film, who wants this film to be the best possible thing it can.
And again, can you be specific about like a scene in terms of the dance, and how much of it was like, how big was your shooting crew? Because it feels there's like this organic flow to it that just feels this kind of, I don't know, like it does feel effortless. And I'm just curious, like in terms of like, how would a scene come about? And how would you, was it very storyboarded, or did it happen as the actors? And then we have to talk about the actors, because for those who don't know, the actors they're not professional actors, right? Both the two main actors.
No, it's their first performance.
Yeah, which is amazing.
Thank you. They are really incredible young human beings. I think, when I prepare with Frank, we talk about every scene. We talk about where we think the camera should be in every scene, or at least, sort of essence for us. Like, what is this moment about? Through whose eyes do we see it? Is this about, what is this actual about? And we watch a lot of paintings, and I think we storyboard it, knowing that that there's a fluidity to it that we will embrace. That we're not going to set anything in stone, because we want to give the freedom to these young actors who have never acted before to also move freely in a way that excites them. And for example, when we have a scene like there's this one pivotal scene in the film where the two of them have a fight on the playground. So we have a sort of positioning and we have a sort of choreography that we know we want. For example, the first 15 minutes of the film are really two boys clinging together. And what I really wanted this moment to be is them being torn apart. So this movement of them being torn by teachers out of each other's arms, and this movement that slowly goes more away from each other, was one that I knew was there and that we needed. So this is something we had decided before, but the actual shape of it was also so much in movement. Because I know if you wanted to keep it fresh with these two young actors, we needed to give them also the possibility to change. Otherwise, it would get too staged, it would get too theatrical, and I really wanted to stay away from that. So that's a moment, for example, where we really worked with them.
And I want to get to the actors in a second, but I've heard you talk about it. I mean, I think of the film very much as a queer coming of age story, but you've also talked about it as sort of a masculinity story, you know, and is it both, you know, like I read it, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's been a very interesting conversation. I mean, I often say that for me, this is a queer film because it deals with themes that are queer. It deals with gender expectations, norms, codes, labels. But I also at the same time say that I do not really know what the sexuality of these characters are. And I also don't think we need to know that in order to say what we want to say. I think this film is about, for me, how we are so unused to seeing tenderness in a masculine connection, in a connection between two young men, and that we live in a world that so often tears men apart because we value independence, competitiveness. We often get bombarded with images of brutality and so little with images of the fragile and the vulnerable. I know that is a queer wound. I know that pushing people away and being pushed away is a wound felt by a lot of queer people, but not only queer. I think I realized as an adult that we just live in a world where masculinity often or too often is depicted as something that is distant, not something that is connected. And I really felt like speaking about that. So I consider this, even though it shows itself as a very intimate, personal piece, I consider this to be a very political film. I mean, this film starts in a bunker, like a space that we have always assigned to men, with this vocabulary of soldiers and war and enemies, to then have these two young boys run out of that space into a flower field, into the complete juxtaposition of that. And I think, I think it was important for me to both confront the ways we have been showing, but also offer somehow another possibility of depicting.
And did you when you were doing the casting, did you only look at non-actors, or did you also consider professional, young actors for these parts? And I'm curious. And then, what was the decision making?
Yeah, I think what was important for us is that we found two young human beings who were at that precise moment in time between childhood and puberty.
Yeah. So how old is that? What age are they?
They were like 12 and going on 13. Yeah. Like that very precise moment in time where love still doesn't have to have a name and still runs freely. Yeah. But at the same time, they become aware of this society where we are all divided in boxes with labels and things. Like this like the movement towards that, I think. And so I thought, and I realized that the chances that we would find actors who would have acted before would have been, I mean, really, really small.
Yeah.
And there were some boys that we saw that had acted before, but with Aiden and Gustav, there was just a chemistry between them that was so present. Like from the very first moment they met, and they had never met before, there was something they shared that didn't belong to us. Like there was something between them already that was like that we weren't a part of, and that really excited me.
Wow. And was that during the casting process, or was that after did you bring them together before you was like, okay, these are the right?
Yeah, it was during the casting process. It was, so we did a very elaborate casting in the sense that we did workshops every time with 20 boys for a full day, because with young people, they have never done it before. They actually don't know if they like it. Yeah. So you also want to give them the opportunity to investigate that. And you also, for me, want to give them the possibility to dare to show you things. Like if you only let them come in for 20 minutes, like they're uncomfortable, they've never done anything, but they can't show you what they can. Yeah. While when you give them time, they will surprise you in many, many ways. And so, they had this connection, these two. And I think that was the most beautiful part of making this film, is that they really became creative collaborators.
That's so beautiful. I mean, when I think there are lots of resonances between our films, but the section from my film with Nan is the coming of age part. This is the second chapter where Nan, she's been thrown out of, she says, and obviously this is documentary, so it's a different context, but like thrown out of every school, every family. And then she meets David Armstrong, her dear friend, and this kind of, and all of a sudden the world makes sense, like he's, the kind of the androgyny, the attraction, the, complete, like finding a home in a society, the sort of a cruel society that, has caused so much pain, so many wounds, as you're talking about, and the sort of coming of age and sort of through their love for each other, and also queer identity in that, and then finding themselves as artists. There is something about these sort of both coming of age moments in these two films that are really precious.
Yeah, I think that is beautiful that you say that, and I really resonate with that, because family can also be the people we do not grow up with. Like we can come to find family also later in life by the people we surround ourselves with. Yeah. And I have to say, I saw your film in New York, which I was so deeply moved by. And I think that inner documentary filmmaker that was there was so reminded of the power of documentary. I think the way that your film interwove the personal with the political and the performative is extraordinary. And so I'm so lucky to be able to ask you some questions now.
Okay, we can switch now, but go ahead. And I know Nan, I should say, like, how much Nan loves the film. I mean, I remember when I got the invitation for a screening, I'm like, Nan, you have to go to this film. And then that's when you guys met. And I wasn't surprised that she loved it in the same ways that I love it. But go ahead, tell me.
I remember, thank you for sending Nan to that screening. I remember seeing her sitting in the audience as I walked up to the front, and my heart dropped to the floor. Because I have been admiring Nan's work, I mean, ever since I'm a teenager, and I kind of also found family sometimes in her work, because I recognized myself in it. And I wanted to start there because Nan has, on different occasions, she told me, like, you can't imagine what it's like having a film about your life. And that marked me, because she said that with so much authenticity. How was it, speaking about collaboration, how was or came to exist, this collaboration between you and Nan for this film?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, like, you know, I don't speak for Nan. You know, there's certain questions I can't answer, but you know, I had known Nan's artwork since my 20s. I discovered it, you know, I was in film school. I had a friend who was a photographer, and that was when the ballad had first come out as a book, and was completely blown away. This sort of, you know, how it represented relationships, sexuality, queer sexuality, trans identity, and this kind of the cinematic quality, right, of the work, you know, the kind of mise en scène and the lighting, and then I later saw the slideshows, but I didn't, you know, for a while I only knew her through her work, and then we had met when I finished my film Citizen 4. She was at a film festival, so we had connected. So we first connected through each other's artwork, and I think there was a lot of mutual respect, you know, and you know, we have some parallels in terms of we're both, like, when she talks about a camera giving her a voice and finding herself through the camera, it's something I relate to. But my work is obviously goes in the kind of political critique spectrum, and then she's, you know, obviously sort of deeply intimate and personal, and so, you know, the way that the film came about was we happened to have a meeting. It was after she created the organization PAIN, which was, for those who haven't seen the film, she decided to create a direct action group to take down the Sackler family, basically, who are the creators of OxyContin, which has led to the overdose crisis. So, so we met, and then I had heard a rumor that she was making a film, and I was really excited because I think we need these examples of like activism behind the scenes. I think it's really important. And then she said that she was looking for collaborators, and you know, it was intense. I mean, it was an intense responsibility for me. You know, like, you know, Nan Goldin has been making films, I mean, not films, slideshows about her life now for decades. It seems like, you know, the possibility of failure was very high, right? You know, and like, you know, but then I also felt I was really excited by like how we could both add to each other's practices, right?
Yeah.
That there is a way that we can kind of have this kind of range from the, like, the deeply personal to the, you know, more, you know, confrontational, political, like it's a critique of society, and not, and then also goes into these, you know, really personal places. And, you know, and that's Nan. And, you know, I can't speak for her in terms of, you know, what it feels like to have a film. I mean, I think what I would say is one of the bravest things that I've ever witnessed. You know, like, I've spent a lot of time with brave people. You know, Edward Snowden is a very brave person. Julian Assange. I mean, these are people who, you know, really just, you know, set a certain threshold for bravery. And, you know, I put Nan in with them because of the kind of emotional bravery that she brings to her own artwork, and then also with this film, you know, and I think it's a very rare thing, you know. I think it's rare to have that kind of bravery in intimate relationships, let alone in, you know, with artwork that's being shared with larger. So yeah, I you know, for me, I felt, you know, this film was possible, you know, because of the collaboration, and Nan is very much a collaborator. So she's also nominated, you know, as for, you know, any of the awards. She's also being nominated because she's a producer, and that was always the right decision. You know, she started the film. So much of the film is based on her artwork, and I don't know. I mean, I think we both feel very proud of the collaboration, but I think it's also hard and terrifying for her.
But I think what I found so beautiful in what you say is, of course, the scope of the film gets very big because it tackles this enormous crisis in the States that was caused by the Sackler family. But the film also moves in completely other territories. Like, it's also about the political of the intimate, about the political of family, about these very interpersonal relationships, and then it takes this scope. So I wonder, in the editing, how did you find the balance in those movements of those different energies?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, like, a lot of times the film gets described mostly in the terms of the Sackler story, that fight, Nan's fight against the Sacklers. But I mean, really, the heart and soul of the film is with Nan and her story and her artwork, and sort of, and it's this interesting, complicated relationship between because her artwork is also her biography, right? You know, like as we're visiting her, you know, teenage years, again, going back to the sort of second chapter with David Armstrong, you know, this is also her first artworks, and they're so spectacular. And then you have the work that she did in Boston, in the trans community, and the other side, and then moving to New York. And to sort of the challenge of editing. I mean, I always knew, I mean, the one thing I knew from the very beginning is that there would be a convergence of the crisis in the AIDS crisis in the 80s and the contemporary overdose crisis, and that those histories would converge, and that would happen like towards the third act of the film. Like I always knew, and because, you know, Nan found herself twice in her life, you know, confronted with devastating loss, and also choosing to like be on the right side of history, you know, to like say, I'm not going to accept, you know, the status quo. You know, the exhibition that she did in New York called Witnesses Against Our Vanishing. I mean, first of all, just the title, Witnesses Against Our Vanishing, gives you chills, right?
Chills.
I mean, right? And it's, you know, it's so like, you know, David Wojnarowicz's, his essay, you know, is so spectacular, and it's so unapologetic, so embracing of gay and queer, lesbian sexuality, and yet is also, you know, acknowledging the suffering and loss, but there's no victimhood here. And, you know, and I just felt that there was something like that moment and her decision to take on the Sacklers and create this organization just felt like saying something about who a person is. And then we kind of went back from there, and almost reverse engineered. Okay, if that's where the story converges here, like where do we need to go in the journey? What do we need to understand? And the other really, I think, you know, thing that I didn't know at the beginning of the film was how important her sister Barbara would be to the film. You know? And that's something like really that had to be centered. So tell me how was it when, like, how long was the process for you to shoot the film? Like and did you shoot chronologically, or did you shoot,
So I think because nature takes this very important role in the film, because this film is also a film about grief, and we knew that the passing of time would be important in the second half of the film, and wanted to use nature to show that in a sort of organic way. We wanted to use these flower fields in different seasons to structure the film. And you know, these flower farmers, they go as they go. They want to cut the flowers when they cut the flowers, which was beautiful because that meant we shot a scene in May. We actually started in May, shot the first scene, which was the planting of the flowers, a scene that is only later in the film. And then we would, of course, shoot most of it in summer with these boys because they had summer holidays. And then we shot the last part in autumn when these flowers were cut from the fields. And that is actually a very important scene because already in the tonality of the visual style of the film and of the sound, there's something that really changes. Like this color all of a sudden gets cut, and this earth comes in the film, and these brutal sounds of these machines as brutality announces itself in the film. So the total shoot, we had 39 days, which was great. I mean, which was also, of course, because with these kids, we couldn't shoot the same hours as we shot with adults. I think, but we rehearsed for a long time. I rehearsed for 6 months with them.
Wow, for 6 months.
Yeah. Which I think with young people is great because they feel they have time. I introduced them to every crew member beforehand so that there is this sense of family. I bring in a camera actually after the first month, and the camera is with us as we're spending time together. So we will, for example, be go-karting, and the camera is with us and films also me. Because what I want to arrive at is that there is this sort of fluidity when we are on set between being and performing. And that the camera doesn't feel like an intruder anymore, but feels like a companion. And that they allow themselves and they allow us to see their vulnerability, even if someone is filming them. Because I think that is a very, very, very difficult thing, like to not consider that camera an intruder anymore, which is also what I wonder, Laura, when you start this film, where do you, from the first things you film, do you already feel you can use them, or do you feel there is like this period where the reality needs to adapt to the presence of a camera?
You know, I haven't, I mean, my experience with, and I think maybe it's the sort of difference between documentary and fiction. Oftentimes when I'm working, I'm usually like dropped into very deep water. Like, it's like, okay, here we go. And partly that's sometimes, I mean, whatever. The first time I met Edward Snowden was in a hotel room in Hong Kong. Like, we didn't have any, you know, like we had never met. I didn't know his name. I didn't know how old he was. I didn't know what he looked like. And I'm like, okay, holy shit, you know, we're okay, let's go. You know, and with Nan, I mean, with that, I only did audio with the interviews, but it went to a deep place very quickly, you know, and that's Nan, you know, that's you know, Nan's work and her practice and her how she approaches all of her work. I mean, you know, you'll have a deep conversation with Nan the first time you meet her, and this is wouldn't be surprised. But and then, so the footage that you shot in the pre-production phase, did that ever come into the edit room, or did it always stay like it was always just the kind of, it must be precious though.
It's precious. It's so precious, because I looked at it recently. I looked back at it, and of course, I'm spending a lot of time now with these boys that have grown up rapidly, because in these years they change. You know, they change drastically. They have mustaches now, and they have grown. And like when I look at that footage, you know, you see these 12-year-olds, and they're still so much also close to that childhood. Yeah. And I see them, you know, look in the camera and get adjusted to the presence of it. And I think I tell them when we do that those images will never be used, because I think it's important for them to feel, or to feel a sort of safe space. Which I think is the only reason that these performances feel so authentic, because the safe space is created for them and they feel it is there. And it's I think when I went to film school and I was in fiction and I learned so much about light and then directing, I always felt it didn't fully resonate with me to make films like that. Somehow it felt too controlled. Like I missed a little bit of freedom. And when I watched, for example, like I remember seeing The Tree of Life for the first time and seeing those young kids and Jessica Chastain and just the poetry of the movement, and it felt so free. It felt like it could run everywhere. And I got so excited about that fluid also, and then I read about the film and how it was created. I got so excited about that fluid line between documenting and creating.
Which again goes back to like the Dardenne brothers, whose work I really do love, and has this sort of the kind of energy I think that you have in your film. And I also just want to say, and I think they want us to wrap, but this idea of safety nets and creating a safe space is also obviously in documentary. It's so necessary and was so necessary also in the process of working with Nan and that collaboration. But I think we should maybe wrap it up. Maybe we can meet in while you're in New York.
I would love that.
Okay.
I would absolutely love that.
Yeah, and then of course I'll see you soon.
I'll see you soon.
But yeah, and really thanks again to the NewFest. I mean, it's a great opportunity for us to get to talk, and I think this conversation will continue.
Definitely. Thank you. I love this conversation, and thank you to NewFest for organizing it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Ciao, Laura.
Ciao.
I do hope we get to talk some more very soon.
Absolutely.
I'm cheerleading for you. I'm absolutely in love with this film.
That's mutual.
Hopefully see you soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.